Could be a monumental day today in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. The state of Mississippi has an abortion law that outlaws abortion after 15 weeks in that state. The Supreme Court justices heard a debate today. And so we are joined by law professor from St. Mary's University, Al Kauffman, who also listened in to much of that debate. Professor Kauffman, thank you for joining us on KSAT Q&A. And right off the top, your impression of what you heard today. Is Roe v. Wade squarely on the table? Are abortion rights squarely on the table of what was debated today?
Well, yes, they are. And that was certainly one of the issues that the state is trying to pursue, which is that the Supreme Court should just reverse Roe v. Wade and the cases that have upheld a right to abortion for certain women. So that is certainly one of the possibilities. Another is that they could uphold the previous decisions and make no change in the law. And then there's some middle ground too. So all of those arguments are before the court, and no one, of course, knows exactly how they will decide.
Yeah, one thing when I was reading what some of the justices in the different camps had to say about this, and Sonia Sotomayor raised the question about, societal pressure, how she doesn't want the court to seem too political. But I mean, either way, it's going to come off that way because this is such a political issue.
Well, there's a lot of political pressure on both sides here. It's going to be very hard for them to make any decision without some concern for that. But one of the issues in the cases is that to what extent have people in society relied on these opinions? Or more specifically, to what extent have women and families relied on the possible right to have an abortion in terms of their developing their lives, their professional lives and personal lives? So to some extent, the courts have accepted that they have to at least look at the effects of these decisions on society.
Viability was one of the things that was discussed today, about the fact that being viable out of the womb, a fetus is considered at 24 weeks. This Mississippi law talks about 15 weeks. Is that a vital part of the arguments that are in front of the justices?
Well, yes, it is. And the Mississippi, the state of Mississippi is arguing that you should basically do away with the viability test, that you should have an earlier level, 15 weeks rather than 24 weeks, and that after 15 weeks, no abortion should be available. Now, since the time this litigation developed, Mississippi has gone back to 9 weeks. And of course, the state of Texas has a standard of 6 weeks. So I think their general position is that viability should not be the test, and that should be based on other considerations. And all of these other considerations are at an earlier part of the pregnancy.
Like a heartbeat.
And in Texas, it's the fetal heartbeat.
Okay. Now, the CDC says that 95% of abortions do take place by week 15. So I'm just throwing that statistic out there.
And that's right. And that was brought up during the decision that most abortions are before that time. However, there's also an argument for those people who have abortions after that time. They tend to be very young people, very poor people, people without advantages. And so the argument on the sort of the pro-choice side is that those people also should have the right to have an abortion. Of course, there are many arguments on the pro-life side as well.
Professor, this is a Roe v. Wade that was put in place in 1973. Is there a chance, do you think, that we are going back to pre-1973? And what did that look like for the United States?
Well, there certainly is a chance that that could happen. Indeed, that's what Mississippi is asking for. Before 1973, it said it was illegal in Texas to have an abortion or for a doctor to do an abortion. And of course, there was a lot of efforts by women to end their own pregnancies, back alley abortions, coat hangers, other drugs, etc. And after 1973, there became a little bit more of an established way to perform the procedure and a much safer way to do the procedure. But basically, if they remove Roe v. Wade, it'll be up to the states. So you might have a situation where half of the states do not allow abortions at all, and the other half do. And persons who are able to travel, have facilities in other states, could get an abortion. People who could not travel could not. And This is already happening to some extent now under the Texas law. Women in Texas who want to have abortions are going to Oklahoma or even Kansas or New Mexico. And as a result, there's so many Texans going to those facilities that they can't handle the number of abortions. So it would be back to the situation the way it was before 1973.
Okay, can we talk a little bit more about the implications of this law and why it's so important? Although, you know, we're talking about something that's being argued for the state of Mississippi, how it could affect all of us. Because when you talk about the Roe v. Wade situation, we know that right now there are 25 states basically waiting in the wings to either completely gut or, you know, make abortion illegal or severely restrict it if that happens with Roe v. Wade, if they overturn it.
Well, that's true. And as I said, about half of the states either already have laws on the books or would soon pass laws that would make it illegal to have abortions in their states and to punish either the doctors or the women themselves or both. On the other hand, as I said, there are interests on the other side. People are very committed to the issue of not having abortions because of the fetus involved, potential life, and those arguments are also very strong. So the Supreme Court is in a tough situation here.
And of course, they won't rule until spring, if even then. Professor Al Kauffman from St. Mary's University, appreciate your expertise in walking us through kind of the ramifications, some of the arguments today. Always appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you, and I'm glad you all are covering it. It's an important issue. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be right back after this.